not been there for many years. 50 years on, the nation stood together in silence for 2 minutes to remember those who'd made such a day possible. Then, across the country, beacons blazed their message of peace, reconciliation and hope for the future. The Second World War affected the population at home more than any other previous conflict. A community play in Plymouth set out to explore the effect of the war then and since. Ian Sterling was there for the rehearsals.
For the first few months of the war, Plymouth was regarded as being relatively safe, out of range of German bombers. But with the fall of France, the city became an obvious target, with the dockyard and military bases. It was only a matter of time before this once proud city centre was reduced to rubble. The night of March the 20th, 1941, in just 4 hours, 30,000 incendiaries and 1,100 high-explosive bombs were released over the city. From then on, thousands of trekkers, as they became known, would leave the city at night, sleeping where they could, away from the dreaded sound of the sirens and the inevitable that followed. By the end of the war, there had been 600 alerts, 59 bombing raids, and the loss of more than 1,000 civilians. When VE Day finally came, it was greeted with muted enthusiasm by a population wearied from war, hunger, and rubble.
Well, when we first went in, 10 shillings a week, of which I had to send 6 shillings home to my mother. So I had the magnificent sum of 4 shillings. Out of which I did manage to save as well, amazingly. And, I used to sing songs about 10 bob a week, nothing much to eat, and all that stuff, you know.
Lillian Carter was working as a plotter at Wembury Point when she heard that the war had ended. She unashamedly left her post and joined the crowds on the Hoe that evening.
I hitched a lift somehow and found everybody on Plymouth Hoe. And everybody was, you know, laughing and thank goodness it's over, and people were dancing with strangers and the Americans and people. And I was right near the Drake statue. I do remember that bit.
We may permit ourselves a brief period of rejoicing, said Prime Minister Winston Churchill. But for young Police Constable Ernest Diggity, VE Day proved to be something of a challenge.
My particular job was an interesting one. I was told that with the aid of a police war reserve, I would have to feed the policemen who were on duty that day. Now, our strength had grown to about 3 times normal peacetime strength. And we were doing 12-hour shifts for the VE Day celebration, so it meant we had 400 people to be fed. It so happened that we had a lot of emergency material, huge tins of Spam. God knows what we'd have done without it. Cans of cheese, margarine, tins of biscuits. Right.
Making do was exactly what Doris Prideaux remembers as a teenager during the war.
That coat, I always remember it because, you know, clothes were hard to come by, particularly when you had clothing coupons. And we had acquired a grey blanket, a lovely blanket. It was a beautiful grey. And we had a friend who was a very good dressmaker, and she made me this grey coat. And it had a tie belt, really lovely. And from my bicycle, which was about 3rd or 4th hand, I really felt somebody, you know.
But other memories are not so pleasant.
The city centre was dreadful because every time you could see more buildings to rubble, and the stench of burning wood and mortar hung on the air for weeks. It was a smell I shall never, ever forget. I don't think we quite believed it was over, but as the day wore on and people started talking to each other across the road and so on, and then we all decided that we would go up on the Hoe and see everybody else and see what we could see out on the Hoe. And we all went up there, and I think most of Plymouth must have arrived up there as well because it was absolutely packed. That we got back down to the city centre, and just by Derry's clock, the bus stops were round about there. But that night, there were rows and rows of naval lorries, the sort with a canvas top and the sides that dropped down. And there were the matlows and the petty officers there, and they were saying, "Come on, get on, we'll take you home. Where do you live? Keam, St Budo," and so on. And so we all piled in the back of these lorries, and we thought it was absolutely wonderful. And we had a lovely trip home, and it finished off VE Day for us beautifully.
But not everyone thought the VE Day celebrations were quite so exciting. There was criticism in local papers about the lack of flags, organised parades and military bands.
Down on the guarded coast of England, Plymouth. Here in this famous seaport, badly hit by many air raids, the people still laugh, still dance. It's an ancient custom dancing on Plymouth Hoe, and the music floats over the ruins.
But when it came to the big day, Plymouth could not muster any live music. Apparently, some people improvised their own entertainment.
I was told by one man senior to me, "You're a little bit late to see the fun on this." I said, "How so, Jack?" And he said there were a couple enjoying themselves in the most natural way in the shade of the fire, of the bonfire.
For many people, it was the start of a real permanence in their lives. As a young sailor, Mac Mackenzie had arranged to meet a girlfriend, not realising what a significant date May the 8th would be.
We arranged to meet on next week, which was VD. We didn't know that at the time. And we went to dance again. Coxon and myself, we were great dancers, remember. We went off there, and I met a friend, and I asked where she was, and she said her father won't let her out. Because there's soldiers that are drunk, there's sailors that are drunk. He said, "I'm not letting you out in that lot." The fact that she'd done it all during the war, it doesn't matter. Anyway, she didn't come, so I gave my address to her friend. And incidentally, her friend lost it. She gave it to her boyfriend to look after her, and she didn't know who the boyfriend was. But eventually she found him, and as it turned out, 50 years we've been married now. Got married in the August, and 50 years this year to my golden wedding.
And a golden wedding is exactly how Plymouth celebrations of VE Day begin. Out of the Rubble is a community play being performed at the Theatre Royal. And on Monday night, there's a special performance on the Hoe. The show traces Plymouth's fortune since the war through news events and music.
I've been nursing an idea, sort of Plymouth piece for a long time. The idea originally came from going round on a bus and looking at one of the bus rides where you look at the old buildings and see what's there. And this is Nancy Astor's house, and that's the Palace Theatre, and that's the cinema, and that's the Citadel, and that's this and that. So the thought originally was a sort of thing about a bus ride. And then I thought, well, if you had a family on the Hoe in 1995, on VE Day, celebrating, the main two stars are called Charlie and Dot. And Charlie and Dot begin the piece by celebrating their golden wedding at a party on the Hoe, a sort of picnic. And that was the sort of pattern of it. So you go from 1995 to 1945, and then they sort of proceed further through.
Ah, there it is now. Come on with me, you children.
You've got to remember that war was still around, and they weren't rushing about like mad, having wonderful, wonderful parties. They were sort of staggering out of what they'd been through, almost out of the rubble, if you want to say that. Totally relieved, terribly glad that everything was good. But it wasn't an enormous kind of jolly knees up. I think there was almost a feeling of total relief.
It requires a great commitment from the company, and we've been rehearsing evenings and Sundays for the last 6 weeks. But now it's a really difficult time putting it all together. We go to the old Palace Theatre, there's a Tiller kick line, girls, Crazy Gang doing pantomime, Wilson, Keppel and Betty, we do Elvis Presley, Beatles, we do a big knees up number on the Hoe.
Because of the efforts of those people on the Hoe, we can celebrate 50 years of peace.
After the jubilation of VE Day, the events which marked VJ Day in August were far more sombre. The sun again shone on the parades and services held across the region, but despite the sun, there were dark places in the memories of those who'd fought in the Far East. A conflict more bitter and more barbaric than many of them could have imagined before they became involved.
One of the largest commemoration services was at Truro, where the day started with a flypast in honour of those who'd been called the Forgotten Army, left to fight on against a foe prepared to die rather than face surrender. A foe who subjected prisoners of war to treatment so cruel that death came to tens of thousands as a blessed relief. Helicopters from RNAS Culdrose, from squadrons with an illustrious record in the Second World War, were joined by fixed-wing aircraft which had travelled all the way from RAF Kinloss in Scotland to add their tribute. The Corps of the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers led the afternoon's parade through the city of Truro. The salute was taken by the Lord Lieutenant of Cornwall, Lady Mary Holborough, as the Royal Guard from HMS Seahawk at Culdrose marched past proudly following their colours. The territorial members of the 6th Battalion Light Infantry bore the Queen's colours as well as their regimental colours. And following the contingent from the RAF platoon at RAF St Morgan near Newquay, there were representatives of the Allies who fought alongside us in the Pacific, members of the United States Navy from the Joint Maritime Communication Centre, also at RAF St Morgan. The veterans who came home from that epic struggle were led by Major Bernard Hitchins of the Royal British Legion. There were standards from branches of the Legion throughout Cornwall, and those of the Royal Naval Association, the RAF Association, Burma Star Association, the Far East Prisoners of War, and veterans of the Normandy landings. There were men and women from all three services who played their part in the Second World War, from escorting convoys through the icy Arctic waters of the North Atlantic to fighting inch by inch through the steaming jungles of Burma. And there were men and women from the civilian organisations who helped to protect life and property on the home front. Young people joined the parade, representing the organisations which uphold the ideals of selflessness and service to the community. A couple of jeeps evoked some of the familiar sounds of 50 years ago. These had been based with the American troops of the 29th Infantry Division in Bodmin in the latter stages of the war. The parade finished at the cathedral, where hundreds joined in the service of commemoration. This emotionally charged day closed with the ceremony of beating the retreat, the traditional signal for curfew and time for soldiers to return to their barracks and billets. It was difficult for those back home to comprehend the horror faced by the men who fought on in the Far East. 1 in 3 were killed, and there was more indifference than understanding for those who made it home.
The advice I got when I went through Portsmouth from the medical officer there was, your leg is bad, but there's nothing we can do about it. When the pain comes, just stamp your foot on the ground and it should go away. Which up to the point was true, oddly enough. It worked. But of course, as the year went by, it got worse. Then they said, as to your, we don't want to listen to your stories, he said. I'll never forget that, what he said. We don't want to, because you've all told me the stories, and they're all fundamentally the same. He said, there's only one advice I give you for your stories, forget them.
But who could forget conditions so bad that death was preferable?
We started getting suicides. And I had one officer, we were playing cards one night in our hut, and he got up and walked out. I thought he'd gone out to spend the penny, and next thing I knew, he'd blown his brains out.
Those captured suffered the most appalling treatment in the Japanese prisoner of war camps.
From ours, it was beating to death or just starved to death. No medicine of any kind. And we ended up, of that 600, there were 18 of us left alive when it was all over. That's a survival rate of 3% only.
I remember a Royal Marine saying to me who was with us, oh, I can't take any more of this, Jack, I'm going to take my life. And of course, if anyone said that to us, Jackson had told us, you must report it straight away. And Jackson, he took this Marine and gave him a good talking to. He said, you've got loved ones waiting for you back home. You've got to make it.
For the people who are growing up in this world should know a lot of the past, because it'll make them realize what their forefathers put up with for the sake of them. If we'd not had the guts, Germany would be ruling us now. Where would we be?
VJ Day was marked by a happy event for Jimmy Young. His war medals were stolen 8 years ago, but the Royal British Legion arranged for duplicates to be cast, and they were presented to him at Exeter's Wyvern Barracks. It's been harder for many of the veterans of the war against Japan to forgive and forget. Claire Wyatt was a prisoner of the Japanese, but went to live there after the war.
The war brings out the worst in people. It also brings out the best. And from my experience of living in Japan for 19 years after the war, I would say that atrocities are not characteristic of the Japanese people.
50 years on, the hundreds of thousands of Allied troops who died in the war are not forgotten. The history books will tell future generations what they went through in their defence of democracy and the defeat of dictatorship. And for those who lived through it, the memories will remain vivid. They may forgive what happened to them, but they won't forget.
You cannot forget what we've been through. Nobody, no human being could ever forget it. No way.
I want to forgive. I need to forgive.
The sun has got his hat on, hip, 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 hooray. The sun has got his hat on and he's coming out today. Now we'll all be happy, hip, 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 hooray. The sun has got his hat on and he's coming out today. The sun has got his hat on, hip, 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 hooray. All the little boys excited, all the little girls delighted. What a lot of fun for everyone, sitting in the sun all day.